Uh, how does that happen, right? How is Erik Kramer the quarterback who pulls that off?
Well, it's kind of like, I guess, when you were talking, describe it, it's kind of like the overnight band success, right? That nobody's ever heard of, that's been playing in clubs for 30 years. And then all of a sudden, they come out with their 180th song that makes it to the top. Well, there was a lot of songs before that that got them there. And I think that's basically what happens is you're kind of,
Yeah.
you're everything in life and what you do with your life is always an evolution. And so you're always kind of getting a little bit better, hopefully, sometimes a little worse, or in fact, learning from your mistakes on the path as well. And so eventually you get an opportunity and it's the right one at the right time. And I always equate my career to, I'm standing in line and right then, something's happened to the guy that's playing, and the coach turns around and says, "Who's ready next?" And everyone else happened to be tying their shoes at that time. And then there I was, and that's kind of how it worked out, honestly. Um,
Yeah.
Good things happen from the very beginning, and but it's only because I was ready. It wasn't because I just kind of lucked into it.
I mean, you created your own luck, through hard work and selflessness and a lot of qualities that your dad didn't have.
Hmm.
Because you don't just get that call from Dave Wanstedt, and hey,
Right.
here's an offer for what was it again? It was like 8 mil over 3 years, something like
Oh,
that. It was a
yeah.
lot at the
Hmm.
time.
Yeah, it was,
You
and
jump,
a lot for a guy who didn't even, like you mentioned before. um, I was on the path to play quarterback. So back when I was in high school, they didn't have freshmen. High school was 10th through 12th. And so when I was a freshman, I played youth football. That was my last year. And then as a 10th grader, I started on JV, but then 3 or 4 games into it, broke a collarbone, I think, and was done for the year. Backed up as a junior, traded, changed schools as a, like in between my, 11th and 12th grade year, right in that second semester, went to a different school. Who, again, this was all sought after by my dad. I had nothing to do with this, and
right? He's
ended up
shopping you around.
right, and then ended up going to. I remember meeting. My dad and I met the head coach at that time, a guy named Bob Donovan, um, who I later found out after he passed away. After reading his obituary, I found out that he was a receiver at San Jose State on the same team with Bill Walsh, and
Man,
whatever. So I remember there's a you wouldn't know this being back on the East Coast, but out here there's a restaurant chain called Bob's Big Boy, and so that's kind of back then in Burbank. That was like the spot, and so we met at a Bob's Big Boy. And anyway, next thing I know, I'm going to Burroughs, and there was a quarterback battle between me and a guy named Rich Strassu, which he was a good athletic quarterback in high school. He won it after, I think, we switched off for four games, I think. And then we didn't lose again. We went to the CF championship, lost there. But anyway, that was my sort of start to this whole thing. But I realized after a while that, what you have to do, in addition to everything physically, meaning running, stretching, lifting weights, all that, watching video, watching film, is that what eventually tied it all together for me was a guy named Kevin Wildenhouse, who was a back then when my first year with the Lions, I was on injured reserve, and back then when you're in injured reserve, you're there all year, and so in practice, I had a hard time slowing things down mentally. So I literally went to the team internist, Dr. Birch, and I said, "Hey, here's what's going on." He says, "Here, go see this guy." And so that's a friendship that I've had now since then with Kevin, and it was this ability to sort of mindfulness, I guess, where you're kind of it's like like visualization exercise.
meditating,
Yeah,
visualization.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's guided imagery, basically, and a way to breathe that kind of allows you, kind of sets the stage for you to slow everything down. And so that's kind of how you want to go through life. And also, if you're playing a sport or whatever it is you're doing, if you can encounter the world like that, that's a good way to go through things.
I like the analogy that he used with you in terms of like being on an inner tube, kind of going down a river,
Mm.
and you've got to
Yeah,
avoid jagged rocks because that you're moving in one direction, but you still have to kind of avoid obstacles and avoid trouble. And it's a lot like playing quarterback in the pocket. That seemed to be a turning
yeah,
point for you in the pros as well. Like the kind of, you've got blitzers in your face, you've got to dissect coverages. But you can't do one at a time when a play
right.
happens in 3.5, 4 seconds.
Right. And so it's kind of like I envision this water sort of flowing down gently, not this rushing river. And because water, when it encounters something like a rock or a boulder, it doesn't stop and shift gears. It just meanders. And gravity takes it wherever it wants to go. And so that's kind of how you want to play. That's how I envision playing. And so everything really does slow down. And and I remember Kevin using some imagery like, um, if you were a camera lens, Eric, and you would go from, let's say, the play gets called, and as you're walking to the line, you begin to notice kind of not only the coverage and sort of this wide angle view, but you would also notice kind of is the cornerback inside or outside? And are there any tips here that look like a blitz or not? And and so you kind of visualize what the play would be before you even call it in the huddle. And these are all things that kind of need a slowed down pace, but sort of in order pace to it as well.